So, welcome to the next life skills class. Over here we have Mr. Egly. I don't know if anybody watching knows him from Bellmont. He's our mechanics teacher. I think you also do welding, right?
Yes.
Okay. So he's going to be teaching us a little bit about car maintenance and changing a car tire, which a lot of people in this day and age don't really know how to do, especially as teenagers. So that's going to be really important going out into the world on our own and going off to college and all that fun stuff. So, do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, let's start out by talking about what we want to keep in our trunk. To be safe and prepared, we have this unit that we keep in here that has first aid kit, and we have a raincoat and bright colored raincoat if you would happen to be working on the vehicle on the road, if you had to do this, as well as a vest if it's not raining. And then I have coolant, oil, and transmission fluid, extras of that, as well as jumper cables in case we needed to jump start it. And we would have blankets. As far as in the winter, if you have any issues with your vehicle not being able to run and you not being able to move. And then of course it would be a good idea to keep food and water as well. And also, I always tell my kids, my family, my students, especially on a trip, to fill up at a half a tank, because if you get stuck on the interstate in traffic, you could be sitting there for hours, and we've sat for hours, and you want to be able to keep your engine running, keep your heat on or your air conditioning on, whatever the case may be there. And also, in normal driving even, I would fill up my tank at a quarter of a tank, because the fuel in the tank helps to dissipate the heat from the fuel pump. So don't let it run real low, run down to E, especially don't let it run out, that's not good. But keep at least a quarter tank in and like a half a tank when you're traveling. So I'm going to show you how to replace or remove and replace the tire if you have a flat tire. So we'll take the spare out of the trunk and we'll remove the tire. I did bring along a torque wrench. Now, most people don't have this with them, but it would be a good idea if you did have to replace your tire to have the fasteners properly torqued with a torque wrench wherever, when you get to somewhere, to get your tire fixed. Now, different manufacturers are going to vary on how and where things are, but your owner's manual should tell you where the jack is, as well as the tire, and a procedure on how to change it. A lot of times it'll have it printed somewhere in the area of the tire as well. Oh, I do have this. This is a tire inflator. Plug it into your cigarette lighter in case your tire maybe had a slow leak, that you could pump it up without changing it. These tires in vehicles now are called temporary tires, or sometimes people call them donuts. So they're not to be made to replace that tire. It's just to get you to a place where you can get your tire repaired. They're different size than your normal tire. You can see how much smaller it is. So it's not a good practice to use this on the vehicle for an extended period of time. So you're going to need a jack and the wrench to remove your lug nuts. Now I got some blocks in here. I would throw some blocks in to block the wheel. And ideally, you want to have a flat, level, hard surface to raise the vehicle on. You may not have that option if it's depending on where you're at, but try to do it in the safest place as you can. It would not be be ideal to be right along the side of the road with traffic coming right by you, especially the interstate, 70 miles an hour. So get as far away from it as you can safely. So you want to put the vehicle in park and block the wheels, and depending on what end you're on, maybe use your parking brake as well. Those parking brakes are for the rear, so in this, we wouldn't want it on, excuse me, on here because we're removing this wheel. But we got it in park and we got the wheels blocked so it won't roll. Now you can see how little this wrench is. It doesn't give you much leverage, so you could use your foot to loosen it up. And you need to do this with the vehicle still on the ground. Okay, so otherwise it will want to turn the wheel. Alright, so then underneath, see these tabs that come down here? They fit in the groove of this jack, okay? And that helps it position it so it stays in place. So you want to position that in the center of that tab that comes down on the groove of that jack, so it does not slip off. Now these jacks are just made for jacking the vehicle up to remove the tire. They are not made to crawl underneath and work on the vehicle. So do not crawl underneath a vehicle with one of these, okay? And even if you jack a vehicle up with a normal floor jack, you always want to place jack stands underneath to support it. Don't ever trust the jack itself to hold the vehicle up. You always want to put something substantial in there, like a jack stand. And different jack handles work differently, but you can usually read the instructions. This one's kind of an odd one here too, but this will crank it up so we can get the wheel off. Just need to get it high enough so that wheel will spin, and then you can finish removing your lug nuts. Now, whenever I go on a trip, I usually throw in my cordless impact and the sockets that would fit the vehicle's lug nuts that I'm driving. And had a scenario just about a year ago where we went to Virginia to bring my daughter home from school, and there was a man with a flat tire at a gas station, and he had his phone out and he had YouTube on, trying to figure out where his jack was. So he had a Jeep, never changed a flat tire before, so I helped him. I showed him where the jack was. I didn't do it for him, but I helped him learn how to do it, and showed him where the jack was, and then we actually ended up using the impact to take his lug nuts off. And the tire, his spare tire, was low on air because a lot of times that gets forgotten, especially if it's underneath the vehicle or in the trunk. People forget to check the air pressure. So that's something that needs to be done regularly as well. Like whenever you change the oil or rotate your tires, you should check your air pressure in your spare tire. Now, instead of putting that little donut on, I'm just going to put this one back on, because you get the idea of how it works. I'll do this. I'll bring that little donut up here and show you how much smaller it is and why you don't want to run that on there regularly, especially on your drive wheels, because you want the wheels to be turning the same speed, and when the tires aren't the same size, they're not going to turn the same speed. So see how much that could affect your handling and stopping your braking. There's not much surface area there. So that's why it's called temporary. Whenever you're putting your lug nuts on, after you get them all started, now especially if you have a impact wrench, you want to get them started a good 3 full turns by hand before you run them in with the impact, because you don't want to cross thread your lug nuts. But when you do go to tighten them, you don't want to tighten one and then tighten one right beside it, because what that does is that pulls on that wheel, and it may not pull down evenly, and it could get it in a bind. It could distort the wheel or the rotor behind it, or it could make you think it's tight and it actually isn't, and then you end up with your wheel coming loose. So you start here with 4 stud with 4 lugs. You start here and you go across like this. If you have 5, which is pretty common, you would tighten them up as in a star pattern. You could go here, 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 and here. So you want to be consistent. Go across. Get them all snugged up. And then I didn't point out, but if it has a wheel cover that comes off, there's usually a slot for that for the valve stem, where you check the air pressure. Okay? So we got them good and snug, and now we can let it down, let the weight of the vehicle on it, so we'll be able to tighten them up the rest of the way. Remember, right is tight, left is loose. Unless it would be reverse threads, and that's usually not very common. So right tight, left loose. Being with this little wrench, you know, if I didn't have my torque wrench with me, I'd be stepping on this to make sure it's tight, but you don't want to over tighten them. So I'll grab my torque wrench quick. I'll just show you how to use a torque wrench as well. So this is called a click type torque wrench, and you adjust the torque by turning the handle, and this particular stud and nut combination is 100 foot-pounds. So I rotate this until I get to 100 foot-pounds. Right there. This one's on 0, and that would be on 100. Okay? And then when I get to that torque, it'll click, and it will break over. Just like that. And then I always want to double check. And for double checking, you can just go around and make sure you don't miss it. You should just feel it. And you should be good to go then. Now, tires are an often neglected area of the vehicle as far as regular maintenance. we recommend in our class to check tire pressure once a month, okay? Because tires can lose pressure just over time as well as with the temperature change. For every 10 degrees the temperature drops, they can lose a 1 psi pressure. And they could do the same with every month of time. And it depends on the type of tire, the tread, or not the tread, but how it seats on the rim itself. And it seems like with aluminum wheels, they're more apt to lose pressure, especially when it's cold. So check your tire pressure at least once a month. And don't go by the pressure that it says on the tire. The tire will give you a pressure. It'll say maximum load and maximum pressure. This has a maximum pressure of 44. So that's the pressure that tire can hold. But to get the right pressure in your tire, you want to look in the driver's door or in the owner's manual. So on the driver's door or door jamb, right there is a tag, and it will tell you how much pressure should be in your tires. And it also lists on that one, it lists the amount in the temporary tires, which is 60 psi in that one and 35 in the regular tires. Also, another area that's often neglected is the rotation of tires. So every 5,000 to 6,000 miles, the tires need to be rotated. And a common pattern that we use is take the two front ones and move them to the back. And then the back ones, you cross them. So the right rear would go to the left front and the left rear would go to the right front. And we got a system going with our vehicles. We use full synthetic engine oil, Mobile One, and we change it at every 6,000 miles. So that is a good time to rotate the tires as well. So every time we change oil, we rotate the tires. Now if you would use conventional engine oil, you would want to change it at every 3,000 miles. But the synthetic, full synthetic, runs easily 6,000 miles. Some of it is rated at 20,000 miles to a year, which I wouldn't run at 20,000 miles, but depending on how much you drive a vehicle, I would probably change it once a year if you didn't get to that mileage. All right, let's look under the hood. I did forget to tell you, when you're finished using a torque wrench, you always back it off. Don't leave the torque on there. So just take it down as low as it can go, because there's a spring in there that has tension on it that makes the torque wrench work. So if you had tension on that spring all the time, it's eventually probably going to affect the torque wrench reading of it. So you want to back it off. So as far as changing the engine oil, now that's something that a lot of car owners do themselves and can do themselves. But if you aren't able to do it yourself, you need to be disciplined in getting it done at the proper time. Like I said, 3,000 for conventional oil and 6,000 for synthetic. And you need to find someone you can trust to do that. Some places you take your vehicle to, they might want to make you a list of all the things that it needs, okay? And they might be doing that to have more business, okay? Vehicle may necessarily not need all those things. So you want to have someone you can trust, because the automotive mechanic or technician has kind of gotten a bad reputation from the few people that do try to take advantage of people. So find someone you can trust if you aren't able to do it yourself. So as far as changing the oil, you're going to remove the engine oil and the filter. Always replace the filter. And when you remove the filter, you want to make sure that the rubber gasket comes off with the filter, because if it would stay on the engine and you go to put your new filter on, that means you would have two gaskets in there, which could cause an oil leak. So always make sure the gasket comes off with it, and then wipe the area clean where the filter goes, and then take oil and put on the new gasket of the new filter, and then tighten it hand tight. You want to put that oil in that gasket because that will help you remove it the next time, because if you install it dry, it can get really tough to remove. So remember those items. Check to make sure the gasket comes off and lube the new one. So most vehicles will have a dipstick. Now some of them will have the dipstick connected to their oil cap, but this one has a dipstick sticking out, and a lot of times it'll be color coded so you can see it, okay? And ideally your oil, you want your oil, you're just checking it and not changing it, you want it to be between those two marks. Now when the engine is cold, it's going to be a little bit higher, so ideally you want to check it when it's cold before you start it. So we're still in the range, and I'm sure it's going to be more up here when it is cold. So that's your engine oil. Now your transmission fluid varies depending on the application. Most vehicles, you have to have them running at idle and park before you check the transmission fluid. This particular one, Honda, you have it when it's shut off. Okay, so there again you have a crosshatch area that it needs to be. So when it's warm in park, setting still, not running, you're checking it and it should be in here. Most of them that you check with a dipstick though will have to be running. So there's something where you need to check your owner's manual to see which one yours is. Okay, so those are the two fluids that you can check there with dipsticks. Depending on your application, you may have differential fluids underneath that you would have to check with the vehicle raised up. Coolant is your next big one. So you have your radiator here, and this has pressure on it. So you do not want to take your cap off when there's pressure in the system, because that coolant will spray out. I experienced that as a kid. I was always curious about cars, and my dad had come home and he raised the hood of the car, and I walked up there and I was just standing there beside him, and he turned that cap and that coolant come out and got all over my face, burnt my skin. I had to go to the emergency room, got in my eyes. So I wasn't the guy doing it, but I figured out not to do it. So what you do here is just press on this hose, and if you feel pressure or heat, you don't want to remove that cap, okay? So you can look over here in this reservoir, and in between those two lines is the level of the coolant, and you can see it's in the range there. So we're good on our engine coolant. Power steering is our next one. You can see here is our power steering reservoir, and we have plenty of fluid in that. Windshield washer fluid, this one here I think uses a dipstick. Okay, and a lot of this is pretty popular too. So this stick goes down in there and you can see the washer fluid in it. You want to make sure you use windshield washer fluid that's rated at -20. Now a lot of times, especially at the big stores, they'll sell summer washer fluid in winter. The trouble is, if you put the summer in the summertime and then you don't use it up, and in the wintertime it may freeze. So always get washer fluid that's rated at -20 degrees. Keep that in there year-round. Brake fluid back here, and that's pretty consistent with the area on there. You can see by taking the cap off that there's plenty in there, as well as you can see through the reservoir, and there's lines of where it should be, the level should be. And most batteries now are maintenance free, where you don't have caps to remove. So just want to make sure you don't have any corrosion happening here, and they're nice and clean. If you see white on there, you want to clean that off, keep that cleaned off, and there's different ways to help prevent it. You can apply some grease to it. They have regular spray that prevents it. Just make sure it doesn't build up on there, because a poor connection can keep your vehicle from starting. Another area you want to look at is air filter. You can see this screen here. Now this was actually on here before I purchased it, but this is a good idea because this is the number one places for mice to build houses. So they crawl in here and then they crawl in here, and they'll chew on this filter, they'll chew the bottom out, and then they'll make a nest or pack nuts in there. Squirrels and mice are bad about that, okay? Now your air filter, to check it, you can take and shine a light through it, and if you can see the light, it's still usable yet. This one, you can see it looks like it's getting some dirt on it, but it's going to show that when it's white, but I'm thinking we're still plenty good there. But try to prevent mice and squirrels from getting in there. I've already seen to where they've gotten in there and packed that so full the engine won't start. Or they'll come in here and they'll chew wiring. That's a normal thing for them to do, is to chew, because of how their teeth continue to grow. So they'll chew wiring and it causes the car to misfire or maybe not even run. What else you could do is use mothballs. This back here is for mothballs. We used to park this car in a barn that would get some mice, and I usually keep my mothballs in there. So it looks like I need to reload my mothball container. It helps to deter the mice. You don't want them under the hood or in the car at all. All right, pretty well. I think covers it. Belts, I guess. Belts, you want to check your belts and make sure there's no cracking. They get dried out, and it's called dry rotting or cracking. Make sure they're in good shape and they have the right amount of tension on it, you can feel. And then as far as your hoses, you want to make sure they're not real spongy feeling, or if you would have oil leaking on them, that really deteriorates them. So you want to make sure you get that corrected, get that oil leak corrected, and replace the hose. All right.
How would you jumpstart your car if you had to do that?
Okay. So, and that's something that could get you in trouble if you don't do it properly. Most cars today have computers on them. Practically all of them do. Multiple computers. And you want to make sure you get your electrical connections hooked up properly. So the car that is dead, and then your car you're going to jump to, ideally you want to shut it off so you're not putting your hands around any moving parts, okay? And then what I usually tell my students to do is just the one person do it instead of having two people doing it, not thinking the same ways. If you're the person doing it, you're going to do it the same. So on your jumper cables, you're going to have a positive and a negative, usually color-coded red and black, but not always. So you'd want to hook up to your positive and your positive on your good one, and then your negative on your good one, and then your last connection, you don't want to hook to the battery, you want to hook it to the ground of the dead vehicle. Like this would be a good spot here on that bracket. And the reason you do that is because you can create sparks by making that connection. And sparks around the battery can be a bad combination, possibly cause the battery to explode. So you want to avoid making sparks. So then after you get it connected, start your vehicle up, that will start, and you might need to let it run and charge up a little bit, and then go ahead and try. And if it doesn't start, you might have to let it charge up more. But then once you get this one started, you'll probably have to leave it run for it to stay running. You just disconnect them in the reverse order then, okay? So you remove your negatives and then your positives. And you want to be careful not to let them touch as you're doing that, as well as let them touch anything metal, okay? If you would ever have to disconnect the battery to remove the battery, you always want to disconnect the negative first, because if your wrench is on the negative, it touches the metal around it, it's not going to make a spark. The only way it's going to spark is if you get over to the positive. So that's a way of doing it safely. But if you started with the positive and hit metal, then you're going to make an arc, which you want to avoid that. Think of anything else? You asked about identifying vehicles. So try to look at their branding. I would call that their branding. So that's a H for Honda. And you could probably Google that on vehicle emblems, vehicle brands and emblems, and look them over to get an idea of what kind of vehicle that is. We talked about to identify a vehicle if it was a hit and run or of any, trying to get away. Ideally, you want to be able to look at the license plate. That would be the best. But color of the vehicle, and if you can see the make and the model, but they don't always put the model on them as well. But usually they'll have the brand on the front and the back. Okay. It's kind of tough because a lot of them look alike. All right. Did you think of anything else? All right, let me quiz you. How often should you rotate your tires?
Once a month.
Once a month. Rotate the tires from front to back,
And then
back to front. Not once a month. What else was once a month? The amount of what in the tire? Air. Check tire pressure once a month. Rotate them by the mileage. How often?
5,000 to 6,000.
Okay, there you go. 5,000 or 6,000. Changing the oil at how often? By mileage. Conventional.
20,000.
Conventional was half of what synthetic was. I do the synthetic at the amount that we rotate the tires. So if we rotate the tires at 6,000, we're changing the synthetic at 6,000. So conventional is half of that, which would be 3,000. All right. What should you do to your lug nuts once you get your tire to where it needs to go to make sure you've got them tight properly? What do you use? Torque wrench? All right. As far as the tread wear of the tire, we didn't talk about that, but the tires have a wear indicator across the treads. So as that tire wears down and the tread gets shallower and shallower, there's a bar that runs across, and when it gets to that bar, or before it gets to that bar, you want to replace that, okay? That's the wear indicator. Now tires vary depending on, pricing from $60 to $200 for a vehicle like this even. These tires on here are rated at 80,000 miles. The set that I had before was rated at 90,000 miles, and I ran them to 82,000 miles, and there still was tread left on them. So, depending on how much money you want to spend, how long you're going to keep the car, if you have the money to spend on good tires, I would recommend that because they last longer, and I think you'll be happier with them, with the ride as well as how long they last. All right, also it's good to keep your vehicle clean inside and out, okay? It helps maintain its value as well as hopefully makes you feel better about it. So take care of your vehicle cosmetically with washing and waxing. Something I would also recommend is using Rain-X on the glass. Does a very nice job of making the water shed off the glass. You can drive your vehicle without windshield wipers if you're going at the right speed with that Rain-X on there. And keep it waxed, help keep the salt and the mud, keep that cleaned off, especially in the winter because that causes corrosion, especially underneath. So when you wash it, don't just wash what you see, spray up around the wheels and the underbody, especially in the wintertime, to remove that salt and all the road grime to help it last longer. And ideally, save up your dollars so you can purchase a vehicle and pay cash for it, okay? And then work, earn more dollars, and then buy a different one. Try to avoid getting a car loan to buy a vehicle, because most vehicles will depreciate in value and you'll end up paying a lot more for that car than you probably should have. So get you a good job, work hard, and save your dollars, and buy a car that you can afford, and then save more if you want to get a better one. And try to drive safely. Talk about that in our class as well, as far as safe driving habits. So when I was in driver's training, they called it defensive driving. So you're always looking out for what the other person could be doing. Okay, always wondering if they're going to stop or not. And if you're coming up to a green light, don't just drive through the green light. Make sure you look both ways, because the other person may not be stopping at theirs. Same way with stop signs, okay? And if you live in our area, when the corn gets tall and you drive in the county, don't just drive through intersections without seeing if there's any vehicles coming. Just slow down. I've taught my kids to slow down if there's corn and you aren't able to see, even though you don't have to stop. You slow down so you can make sure that that person is stopping. All right.
I actually got into a car accident like a week before my birthday, a couple weeks ago. You know Jackson 2nd over here? Okay, I was coming from the other side of town going towards Bellmont. The other guy was coming from this side of town going towards that way. He didn't stop at his stop sign. I pulled up, I stopped, I looked both ways twice like I always do, I'd go. And when I pulled up to a stop, he was still all the way down the street. So I went, and he didn't stop at the stop sign and rode right through, and he crashed into the side of my car, and they almost totaled it. Almost. Luckily, they got the damages, like the amount of how much it would cost. It was like $6,000, which is like more than half what the car's worth, and decided to fix it. I'm actually getting it back today. It's a 2014 Chevy Cruze. It's like a really dark red. It's absolutely gorgeous. But the entire side of my car, I couldn't have any passengers on that side because the doors were crushed in so far you could fit your hand in the gap between the door and the roof of the car. We had to tape it up so water couldn't get in and damage it. The pillar right there where the doors connect, that was also crushed in. The front passenger seatbelt was completely locked, like permanently. Yeah, it was awful. And it was terrifying.
Did your airbags go off?
No, they did not.
Okay.
Although the other guys did, his front ones. His car is totaled, and it was a brand new car.
Really?
Yeah.
Yep. That's called defensive driving. Watching out for that other person. Think of anything else?